Welcome to the Monday Monologue. And I know it's been a little while since I made some content, but I've been really busy. One thing I'm not sure all of you know, I was on the city council in the city I live in Doraville, and this is my last year, and it ends in January, and I was trying to wrap up some deals and negotiations and just some projects in this last month, and I spent the last two or 3 weeks trying to deal with all of that stuff, and I got all that off my plate. Plus, I've been building some phono stages that people have put down deposits on. I got a 2A3 amp I built. I got another 2A3 amp I need to build. I got this color preamp that I'm building. But anyway, let's talk about what we got right here. This is a tape head preamp from Earnhardt Audio, and I'm really diving down this rabbit hole of trying to get high-end tape sound out of kind of a budget tape deck, which, I mean, it was a studio deck, that Tascam 32, but you see them on eBay for sale pretty reasonably, like a lot cheaper than a Studer. The problem with them is twofold. One, the electronics are really old, and from what I understand, they weren't great playback decks anyway. They were good at recording because it was like a mix-down deck, but as far as hi-fi listening, they're not the best thing on the planet. And again, old electronics, they get all out of tune, and so I added some tape head out jacks on the back of it, which was really easy to do. Going to be doing a video about that soon, and we hooked this guy up, and I'm still trying to sort everything out. I'm going to save that for another video, but that's a project that I'm working on. And then this is part of the same project. This is a Marantz 7 RIAA board, which is different than the ones that I sell, which are these, which are the EAR 834 clones. Different circuit. But the thing about this Marantz 7 is the whole EQ thing is done in the feedback loop. And it's like a super high gain, so you can get the 60 dB of gain that you need for a tape head, but it's also tunable to be IEC versus RIAA. So it can be turned into a tape head preamp. And so got the stuff coming here. Obviously got the board, got it all populated and stuff, and got a good start on it. And I'm going to go over how I did this board in a future video. I gotta fabricate up a slightly different chassis than these, and then that's gonna be something that we try to and compare it to this, and just we got stuff going on with the tape deal. So let me get this out of the way. So got the color preamp here that we're building for a customer that bought my KT120 mono amps. Finally sold those, and I know they're gonna be super happy. But I've got a wood chassis fabbed up by my woodworking guy, and I got this chassis all fabbed up, or the top plate all fabbed up, and we're zipping along on that. Hopefully to have that done by the first of the year. And one of the things I've been doing is a lot of experimentation on stuff. I don't want to get too deep into like this whole tax stuff, but because I'm starting Social Security next year, I got to limit the income from this year so I don't get excessively taxed or whatever. So I'm kind of putting off some of these projects for customers until January, because next year I don't get penalized. Just whatever. Just how the federal government is. But anyway, that's part of what I've been doing, is doing a lot of experimenting, and that's why I've been playing with those tape head preamps and stuff. And here is, I've talked about this headphone amp output transformer, and that's what these look like. And these are gapped at 75 milliamps, so we can run 2A3 tubes. And then here's the little multi-piece little Lundell transformer cover that has got Lundell on it. And yeah, kind of a weird deal, but hey, at least they're not ugly like this. You can't stick that on top of an amplifier. The other thing, though, that we're going to be playing with soon is balanced inputs. And Holger at Earnhardt Audio set me up with these little circuit boards that have a transformer made on the back of them and an XLR jack that input out 2 wires single-ended to the tube circuit. So I'll be able to offer XLR inputs on my amplifiers coming up soon. And actually I have a customer that wants me to try doing it on one of these color preamps. So that's some stuff we're playing with. So one of the things I've been struggling with this month has been some, I'm going to call it synergy issues. And I feel like that in some ways I've been very lucky that I've stumbled upon a combination of things that just work well together. And I don't know, some of it probably wasn't just stumbling. Some of it was kind of understanding how these parts interact with each other. Like on my 283 amp, when I first built it, I was using the, I think it was JE Lab schematic, and it specifically said to use carbon resistors. And I did. And to me, it just sounded dead, really woody sounding, and just not my cup of tea. And so I went through it and replaced all the resistors with metal film resistors, those V-Shave PRO2s that I really like. And that totally changed the way that amplifier sounds. I mean, just like night and day. And if anything, it was a little too edgy. And then I went back in and replaced the output tube grid leak resistor with a carbon film. And that took the edge off of it. With the Haber transformers, sounded fantastic. And so I tried putting in the Tango FC12S's, built another one with an FC20. Sounded even a little more detailed, I feel like, but very similar, great sounding amplifier. And so I decided to build one for myself. And I'd seen these mesh plate 5U4 EML rectifier tubes. And I thought that would be cool to try a mesh plate rectifier tube. So bought one of those, read all the warnings about using them, and so I had to add some resistance between the power transformer and the rectifier tube, and then this rectifier tube has more voltage drop than normal, etc. And I ended up with a lot lower plate voltage on the 2A3 tube. And guys, the amp just doesn't sound good anymore. And, you know, I compared it to another amp that had the same power supply that I've been using in that amp with the same Tango iron. It sounded great. And so it's something with the power supply. And I mean, I used to think on a single-ended amp the power supply really doesn't make much difference, but I'm learning that it's got a big difference. And I don't know if you guys remember the video I did when I swapped that Soline cap in the power supply for a WEMA and how it just killed the bass. And so I'm really learning that tuning the power supply is part of the magic in getting these amplifiers to sound good. And the same thing's true of tuning the circuit to the output transformers. And another thing that was kind of a bummer, had a customer that wanted one of my EL34 amps, but he had these tube tot speakers or something from Deckware that were 4 ohms, which seems kind of weird to me that speakers that are designed for tubes would be 4 ohms. I mean, tubes don't like low impedance speakers, but anyway, he wanted to use those, and I should have just said no. And I needed to learn to do that. And I've just been bad in general in my life about not knowing when to say no. And so I had a pair of custom wound transformers from Musical Power Supply that had both 4 and 8 ohm taps. And when I talked to Matt about it, he warned me that the 8 ohm tap version of this transformer, which I've been using and I love the sound of, he explained that that transformer interleaves or whatever lays out perfectly on the bobbin, where it's got very low leakage inductance or inductance leakage, whatever. I'm not a transformer person, but he warned me that if he does 4 and 8 ohm taps, they're not going to lay out as nice, and that, you know, you could do a 4 ohm or you could do an 8 ohm, but when you try to do both, at least with the way these are wound, that it's going to be less than ideal. And, you know, I talked to the customer about it, and they were like, well, I'll probably never hear the difference. Let's just go ahead and do it. And so I bought a pair of these custom-made transformers and actually got 2 pairs made, which was a mistake. So I swapped them into the amp and put a switch on the back to switch between 4 and 8 ohms. And, you know, I listened to it. I didn't sit there and, like, critically listen to it, but, you know, it all worked. So I boxed it up and sent it off to the guy. And turns out he is a very picky listener, and he was like, you know, he tried all these different tubes, and I mailed him a bunch of different tubes to try to make him happy, and just, he was like, yeah, this just doesn't sound clear enough and that sort of thing, and so he returned it. And then when I got it back, it was like, man, does this thing really sound that bad? And I hooked it up to my system and put on some music that I know to like really focus on listening to it. And it was like, yeah, these transformers just do not work near as good as the single tap ones do. And I should have listened to Matt, and I should have ignored the customer saying that they're not a picky listener, because if they're buying a tube amp, they probably are a picky listener. And I need to like stop trying to cater to kind of things that are not right for the amps that I know work well, and stop trying to please everybody. So anyway, now I got 4 of these output transformers that are just okay, that I'm probably going to, I hate to even sell them on eBay, but I guess, you know, I'm not going to build any more amps with them. And I told Matt what happened, or, you know, just so he would know. And I wasn't like, hey, you need to take these transformers back, because it's not his fault. I told him to do it. And I need to learn to listen to folks like Matt that are professionals when they say that's probably not going to be ideal. And so, yeah, because I will say the only other time I've had problems with an amp that I built was when someone wanted some weird change made to it from what I normally build. Or they're using it in a use case that I don't think is ideal, but they've convinced me, oh, I think it'll be fine, and then they get it, and they're like, oh, this isn't fine, I want to return it. And returning stuff doesn't make anybody happy. And so, anyway, that's kind of my story on these transformers, but I guess my point in this is there's a synergy to this stuff that goes beyond what the measurements show. And just because something measures okay doesn't mean it's going to sound good. And I run into that more and more often. And it's like these balanced transformers, I don't know what they're going to sound like with my amplifier. And so I got to try them. If I don't like them, I'm not going to, people say I need a balanced amp, I'm just going to be like, sorry, I don't have one. Had a bunch of people wanting to buy these phono stages with balanced out. And I'm just like, no, I don't do that. If you can't deal with singling it out, then don't buy one. And I need to learn to stick to my guns on that stuff and not get talked into doing something oddball that I am not sure, especially if it's just a one-off thing. Because if it's something that I can sell to other people, it's one thing. Like these, this is worth testing. But like this, how many people actually want 4 and 8 ohm taps? And I tried to get him to buy one of my 2A3 amps that is 4 and 8 ohms, but the money got in the way. And that goes to my next point is I really think I'm going to stop trying to chase this, like compete with these China amps price point. I don't think that's my market. I think trying to sell these really low-priced amps, I'm having to compromise on the parts being used, and instead of being like skunky sound, they're just mediocre amps. and I don't need to be selling stuff like that. It's not good for my brand. I wouldn't listen to them, and so why should I sell them to you? Saying that, well, this is better than, a solid state chip amp. Well, I want to be better than that. I want my amps to be the kind of thing where you compare them to anything and they're going to sound great. So, I'm going to try to standardize my whole lineup and not have so many options on variations of them. And have my EL34 amp that's got these musical power supply transformers, and that's just how they're built. And that way I can get the chassis all prefabbed up. I don't have to do custom fab work for different, I want to use tangos, and I want to use this other transformer stuff, and then I got to try to voice them to all these different options, and there's just, I don't have enough time to deal with that. Then I'm going to build 2A3, probably going to just stick with the Haybooer iron. They really sound good. And for the extra money, at least in that amp, I'm not sure upgrading the output transformer makes enough difference to warrant making two different models. I mean, it is a little better. Leave in the comments below. Should I put Tango transformers or should I put Haybooers on it? It's probably about $300 cheaper to put Haybooers on it, and they're made in the U.S. And I don't have to import them from Japan and worry about tariffs and all that kind of stuff. And then I am building a budget 300B, but I think that's going to end up being more like a project for the channel, for you guys. And I think I'm going to build a 300B amp with these ISO FC30s and just build kind of a deluxe model of my 300B, and that's going to be my 300B amp. And then, I am okay with doing this idea of having either these, black metal powder-coated chassis versus these aluminum plate with the wood surround, and just you pay extra for the, the wood and that sort of thing. And that's going to be more kind of a custom build. But as far as my standard builds, I think I'm going to really stick with this black powder-coated thing and just build them like that. That way I can just put all the holes drilled onto the CNC machine or the laser or whatever, and then I don't have to do anything except build the amps, and I'm not doing fab work on them. So, yeah, I think that's kind of what we're going to do going forward. So, anyway, that's what I've been doing, and I've been super busy, like I said and shown and all that stuff. The other thing is I'm working on a CNC pattern for this, or a CAD file for this phono stage chassis. I get a lot of people asking about these phono stage chassis, and I don't want to do a kit. I mean, this is too, getting all the parts together for these things is a pain. But if somebody wants to buy a chassis, I think that could be something that wouldn't be that difficult to do, because there's a zillion people selling these boards. So, and you can source all the parts. But anyway, I've got a CAD file in the works for making these. The other thing that I thought about doing too was making another version of this where I put, instead of having the RCA jacks on the front and on the top, move them on the back here, and put the IEC connector over here, and then all the things are on the back, and it would sit on the shelf sideways. But some people need it to sit like this so it can sit along the side of the turntable. So, yeah, let me make two versions of that. So, yeah, in dealing with this CAD file stuff, it's harder than it looks when you're using someone else to do the actual CAD, and we're sending emails back and forth, and move this hole over a little bit, and do that, there's a lot of back and forth before you really get one that's right. And so, yeah, that's a lot of work. Anyway, that's kind of where I've been for the last few weeks. And like I've said before, I just didn't really feel like making videos, so I just took a little break. And now that I feel I'm kind of rebooted and refreshed, hopefully we're going to have a flurry of content here in January of hopefully some tape stuff. I've really got into listening to these higher end pre-recorded tapes. The ones from Acoustic Sounds are really good. And until you've heard one of those, it's hard to describe how good they sound. And yeah, it's expensive, but sometimes you have to pay to play, right? So anyway, thanks for you folks that have supported my channel. Thanks for hanging in there while I took a little break here. Again, hopefully to have a bunch of content coming up here in the New Year's. And we will see you next week for the Monday Monologue.